Hello, everyone, and welcome to the series where I read full Yu-Gi-Oh sets so you don't have to. We're heading in to Burst Protocol season. We just got the ban list today, so super excited to get a fresh perspective on a lot of these cards because most of them I have already read, in preparation for this video. I've filmed it once before the ban list, but we get to take another look at a lot of these now that we, sort of have a better idea of how the meta is going to shape out exactly. I guess before we go into it, assuming Burst Protocol did not exist, what I would expect as this ban list comes into form, would still be, Draco Tail, VSK9, and probably Mitsurugi. I do believe will still all be generally the top three decks. Obviously, Burst Protocol has some, not only support, but some, new archetypes, support for old archetypes that, could shake things up. So let's hop on in. We're going to start with the generics, and then we're going to head into the archetypes after that. I say generics, but that could apply to one-off support pieces for an archetype just because they don't really warrant their own section. We're going to start off with Sheena, the Twin Storm Deities of Divine Thunder. Essentially, while you control a wind, when your opponent does anything, you can special it from hand and then bounce either all the monsters if they used a monster or all the spell traps if they used a spell trap. This card is not going to be good on release. A lot of what this video is going to be is like, hey, these are cards to just remember exists eventually. Just stuff that could potentially be playable that, maybe won't be out of the box. But I do think there is probably, a reality where a semi-control focused wind archetype can play this as a bomb card. If it ever becomes searchable, this card is obviously incredible. Other than, the ways we already have, which, I'm not obviously, I don't know every way we can search this, but at least archetypally, there's no archetypes that jump out at me as, oh yeah, this is going to be, the deck that'll take advantage of this. But yeah, I mean, it being a dragon definitely gives it a lot of that flexibility for searchability, but obviously not going to see play on use. So that'll do it for that one. We're getting into a big hitter right away. Obviously, again, Magistus card, but it's the only Magistus card in this set as far as I'm aware of. So it's Spenta, the Magistus Sealer. Some of you may know it as Spoon. Basically, you discard to add a Magistus monster, and then you can banish it from grave to equip a Magistus monster to one of your monsters you control. Again, Magistus is all about equipping and whatnot. This engine sees play in a couple of different strategies. We've seen there were some kind of quirky Ryziel variants that tried this. Obviously, that was, I believe, in Master Duel. So, again, just there's some ideas. I saw Centurion, I saw White Forest can play this engine, but obviously the main one is going to be Draco Tail. The issue is this card popped off really hard in the OCG. Draco Tail Magistus did in general, I'll say, because we didn't have this card so late. They got this card much earlier than we are, so it had a lot of time where it, more or less was the best Draco Tail variant. But for now, at least, especially in the OCG, and I expect this to be the case in the TCG as well, this side engine that you see in Draco Tail is mainly outclassed by branded, especially with the new branded support in this set. We'll get to that later. But yeah, this card is very strong, has, a lot of applications. It can get you to a lot of fours, a lot of advantage, but it's probably not going to be the premier Draco Tail engine like we thought it was, again, just because of that branded stuff. Next up, unfortunately don't have the artwork for this card yet on Card Cluster, but Stormbane Dragon Disturbim. I believe this is a TCG exclusive. Can't be targeted, which is just some nice protection. Can banish any number of dark monsters from your graveyard that can't be normal to special, or apologies, normal to set. Banish that many cards your opponent controls. It's a quick if they have more cards than you. This card is surprisingly good. A Dark Dragon 11 synchro does have a niche. There's not really that many great 11 synchros just in general to be making. So this card does have a really solid niche that probably will come up. It's a pretty solid effect, obviously restrictive, but I can see this seeing play in, a couple of different archetypes if they're able to make it, or just, again, in the future. For example, again, there's a sort of pep style card where it is this big, banishing 11 synchro, but it is actually an interaction piece. It's a little bit of a weird one because they have to have more cards than you, but that's not the most annoying thing to enable, especially if, for example, you're quick syncing into it on your opponent's turn, because that'll also generally be tied to usually synchro monsters that can't be normal to set. So that is just, again, a card that I do think will eventually see some kind of play. And next up, we see the new Triple D support. They're only getting one card this set, and it is a really good one. Sage King Alfred doesn't exactly fix any of the problems with Triple D, where it has these issues into the lingering hand traps, Drollfua, whatnot. Obviously, it has lines around Droll in some certain circumstances, but what this card does do is it gives you a real second fusion monster. Because if we look at what Triple D's got access to, all of these fusions are kinda ass except for Genghis. Even Big Genghis is not really that good. So having another fusion target, I mean, I guess I should say what the effect is first, but basically it shuffles from graveyard, banish, field, or hand to fusion summon, which is incredible. I mean, obviously, this is most of the time going to get summoned off of Necro Slime or something similar. Recycling resources that normally are a little bit harder to retrieve in the banish pile is fantastic. The other effect honestly doesn't really matter. But when we look at the fusion pools, I mean, obviously this card you're not really fusion summoning, but all of them suck except for the 2/6s that now exist. And shocker, 2/6s go into Waking Caesar. It gives you a lot more flexibility with your Clovis to be able to go into Siegfried in a lot of lines. Again, it doesn't fix any of the inherent problems with, Triple D, but it is a really nice option that'll help it do what it's doing now better. Then, I guess technically we do have another Magistus card. This is another import. This is the Magistus Alistair fusion on special. You can just target a extra deck type in your graveyard and one monster on the field and banish them, which is a pretty good effect, but it's a little bit restrictive because its condition is an extra deck type, and generally you're going to be making this with Invocation, which means you're going to be banishing that from your graveyard, or obviously you can use your opponent's graveyard, but as a option, it's very strong. I mean, obviously this is meant to be similar to a Go Second piece, so you're going to be banishing out of your opponent's graveyard, but it requires setup, which, again, a little bit awkward. This card's not going to really make, invoked great or anything like that, but it's a okay option in Magistus. Again, probably not anything too meta, but who knows? Magistus getting cards is, a little bit interesting. I mean, we saw they got the Link 2 a little bit ago. They have some strong options and strong plays. This is a card that you probably won't see in Dracotail, for example, though, so probably won't see that much play in general. Speaking of Dracotail, apologies, we're gonna head to the new Dracotail fusion, Charus. This card is a little bit weird. You can target 2 Dracotail cards in your graveyard and 1 face-up card on the field that matches the type of either of the cards you targeted. You can still target 2, for example, traps or spells or monsters. You just have to be able to target that same type of card on the field. This can target your own field, but generally Dracotail's not really going to try to do that much. You can, I guess, target itself to shuffle back your monsters, but generally you want those engraved. So again, this card's not bad. It generally hasn't been seeing too much play in the OCG, which, I think a lot of people hyped this card when it was revealed initially, but it just hasn't really done what you need Dracotail fusions to do. This is a card that, again, you want to try to commit into instead of Gulamel and Altharion, which means it probably has to be better than those cards. And then at a certain point, you're also competing with like Secretarion and that sort of thing. I was a little bit more down on this card until earlier today, especially with the Ketsu limits. I was doing a lot of detailed branded testing, and I did run out of spell traps entirely in a couple of different situations where, I got ashed on one trap, belled on another, and then the third one got dodged by Fall on the Virtuous. There are situations where having another way to recycle your spell traps is nice, but this card seems like more of a luxury than a must include by any means. So it's probably, again, going to end up being that 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th extra deck card where a lot of the time it's going to get shaved out. So it's not really as incredible as it would seem on or as it would look on the tin, but it's not a bad option for Dracotail to have, especially, again, if we have another ban list that, hey, maybe they hit Altharion or something like that. This is definitely a card that probably slots into that open spot. But after that, we have the new Canine card. Before I even get there, don't ask me to read the new Yummy card. It is horribly bad, like really, really bad. And Yummy is kind of dead. So, but yeah, piercing, it's piercing, whatever. On summon, by a Canine spell trap, so basically off of forced release, you can target up to 2 cards in your opponent's graveyard and banishment, shuffle them into your deck. Nice little side effect. It's a okay effect, but obviously not better than Werewolf, which this card directly competes with. Obviously, the power, though, is in that last effect. When your opponent uses a monster effect, detach 2, nuke the board. Why not, right? This card does have some issues, though. I mean, obviously, it destroys all of your own cards, including itself, which is kind of a problem. It leaves your shields down pretty heavily. Um, and again, the main thing is that this competes for the werewolf spot off of your forced release. You're not going to play both of this and werewolf. I would say most, if not like 90-95% of decks are going to want to play werewolf instead. That card is busted out the ass. Um, the main thing with this card for use case would be, at least that I've seen so far, in Canine Orchist, where you can Dingirsu protect your own field while still, getting the full nuke value. Um, Again, this card does still have issues. The fact that it has to detach 2 for its effect means you can't go Ripper Summon, Ripper Search, Ripper Negate, and then make this, which is obviously what you really want to do a lot of the time, and that's what you do with Werewolf. So this card is really, really awkward a lot of the time. Probably won't see play in a ton of decks. I do want to kind of try it in Canine Orcus, though. It sounds kind of fun. After that, we have Zarin the Chainbound Dragon. This is one of the big generic synchros coming out of the set. Synchro 7, Dark Dragon. Man, there is a lot of Dark Dragons in the set, so get used to me saying that. You can treat it as a non-tuner, which is, I guess, kind of nice. There's some circumstances where you can use this to synchro, although this card is good enough that you probably don't want it to leave your field. So, I mean, that's a good thing and a bad thing at the same time. But I mean, extra text is never usually a terrible thing. But yeah, when a card is activated in response to the activation of a card or effect, you can negate, or apologies, activate one of the effects. You can basically negate the thing that is responding or the thing it's responding to. So you can essentially still chain block Zarin, but you have to do it a little bit differently. So, for example, if you're resolving this big Draco Tail chain, you want to resolve your Altharion. So, if you're going Altharion 1, you can go Malulu, Pawn, Lucius, and they have the option of negating the Lucius or the Pawn, or Pan, apologies. So, again, it's a very interesting card. Obviously, it's negation on a Synchro 7, which is very strong. I expect this card to be good in quite a few decks, especially because it does require a Synchro as you know, it doesn't specify non-tuner, funny enough, so you can still use 2 tuners for this. The main thing that's going to be holding this card back is the summoning condition. Needing a Synchro is a hoop to jump through. We do have quite a few, Synchros that just reborn bodies and spawn bodies that can still try to make this, but they have to be a non-tuner synchro reviving a tuner or a tuner synchro reviving a tuner. So yeah, for example, like Trisukta doesn't work with this card just because the levels don't match. But there is definitely potential for this card. This card is strong if you're able to make it. And then the big card of the set, Forbidden Crown. This card is good. I don't want people to think it's not good. I am of the opinion, though, that this card will flop on release and will not see a ton of competitive play. I think this card is strong. The fact that it doesn't target is very, very good. Unless this is a mistranslation, I don't believe this card targets, though, which is obviously great. Bypasses a ton of different cards' protection, and it does a lot. I mean, this card is very, very strong, but it's kind of an awkward card. It's kind of low value. I know that's kind of a weird thing to say about a card that does this many things, but when you compare to things like Droplet, like Dark Ruler, that are these mass negation cards that also have generally the stipulation of no responding, it is a very good card. And it's a very versatile card, but it does kind of struggle to put itself in deck lists. I think it doesn't have the power it needs to be a side deck card, and it isn't generic enough for a lot of decks to want to run it in main. If this card didn't negate, it might honestly be a little better because it would be like the most broken anti-hand trap card ever. But I mean, I'm kind of glad it negates, so you can't just dodge hand traps with this thing. But yeah, this card is good. I don't want anyone to think it's bad. I just think that this card will probably be like $100 on release or something close to that in Canadian, and it will probably not warrant that price tag with its immediate competitive success. But I'm down to be proven wrong on this one. I think it's very, very possible. Just popping in here to review one last card that I guess just missed that sort of sneak peek wave. I don't think anyone pulled it, surprisingly. So, Mercurium, the Living Quicksilver, was revealed hopefully the day this goes up. Either that or it'll be yesterday when this video goes up. Mercurium the Living Quicksilver. This card is really interesting. It's a rank 10 Dark Aqua, so it is technically... I already saw some people talking about this in tier elements. I think that's cope, but we'll read it first and then we'll go from there. Onyx Sea Summon attaches any monster from your deck to this card as material. Already a great tertiary effect, or I guess primary effect. It's weird because that feels like the least important effect on this card, even though it is still a great effect. Attaching anything from deck, I mean, if it triggered more consistently on Zeus, would be a huge part of that card. So definitely something to keep in mind with this, although I think the main part of this is obviously going to be the Floodgate part, which is, while this card has material, your opponent can't activate the effects of monsters in the graveyard with the same attribute as monsters in your graveyard. That's just obviously great. There's a ton of archetypes that can just max this out and essentially Dweller. Obviously, you can still use spell trap effects in Grave. That's something that this card does differently than Dweller, but this is obviously a great effect. The question for this card specifically is what enables it, and at least right now, the answer is not much. As far as like rank 10 decks go, it's like, okay, Testina, Trains, you can try some like Ubel stuff, but this card pretty much directly competes for like the Varudris spot in all of those extra decks, and Varudris is generally like a really, really damn good card. But I can see a reality where this turns into like, obviously not as strong as VFD, but it's similar to VFD where it was good for a really long time, but just didn't really have the enablers that it needed. I can see an archetype coming out in a couple of years that really breaks this and can make, you know, like this and Varudris and a bunch of other stuff. Like, this card is great, and it does have a lot of situations where it is good, but it does have problems, and its problems are, again, just enabling. I think it's a strong payoff. Obviously, floodgates are floodgates. They're always good, and I'm not sure exactly how much I like them printing another Dweller, but this one, again, does have a lot more interest than, you know, Dweller just sort of blanket saying no. You can interact with this a lot better. It doesn't linger. It's much more well designed, but it does still have those floodgate properties. So I think it's a very interesting card. I don't think it'll see play out of the gate. Obviously, there's just nothing really to enable it right now. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, and I'm down to be proven wrong, but I think Varudris probably does what this card does a little better in a lot of those situations. So at least that's my initial clock on this card out of the gate. Last one for the generics that I just kind of tossed in here because I thought it was kind of funny. Forbidden Ritual Art mainly included this because the other Ritual Art cards have seen smatterings of play, especially Advanced Ritual Art has, you know, some funny opportunities and such. But you can Ritual from Grave by banishing from Grave, which is, again, it's an interesting effect. Ritualing on your opponent's turn is, again, just generally very strong. There's some very annoying floodgatey style rituals that if they're summoned, for example, Dark Magician of Chaos, something to that effect. I don't remember the exact name. I don't think anyone really cares, but there are some really annoying pieces. And then it does have a pretty good secondary effect where you can banish it from Grave, and then when you Ritual, you can banish specifically Ritual monsters from your Grave as the requirement, which, at least when I first read this, I was like, okay, this is potentially a Mitsu card, but probably, again, will not make the cut in Mitsurugi. But there's some funny stuff you can probably do with this in a couple of different decks. That is going to do it for the generics. Let's see, where do I want to go next? I think we're going to try to go for the archetypes getting a little bit less support, just since it'll go a little bit faster. Let's hop over to Radiant Typhoon. They're getting 2 cards. I'm going to go with the Link monster second, just because I think Elation isn't quite as good as the Link, and the Link is just, again, a great card. I think Elation, the ability to special from Grave is good, but not incredible. This card's a one of it, probably most, but it does provide recursion, which the deck didn't have, an insane amount of, but yeah, generally not the most impactful card. What is an impactful card, though, is the Link 2. This card is insane, and I am so glad they locked it to Radiant Typhoon monsters and not just Wind or something like that. Because on Link Summon just adds MST from deck or grave to hand, which is already not a terrible effect. But the bonus effect is you can target 2 face-up monsters on the field, including at least 1 Radiant Typhoon. you can target itself, which is great because this card doesn't do a ton else. Um, you can just spell trap monsters, which is great. I mean, it's one of the best forms of pseudo removal because it keeps it out of grave for recursion. It's just very awkward to deal with a lot of the time. And then if a quick play is activated, you can place the continuous trap face up on your field. Again, the continuous trap, one of the most important cards of the archetype. Being able to access it turn one isn't like a massive buff, but just being able to access it way easier and not having to search it is obviously great. So this card is incredible. I don't think this card is what brings Radiant Typhoon to the next level. I think it still ends up being a bit of a regional deck. I think you can still top a regional with it. I just wouldn't trust it at a YCS or anything like that. So again, great card. Not exactly what I expected for the archetype, that's for sure, but it is definitely a card that has potential. After that, let's head over to Exosister. Exosister, an archetype that has seen, smatterings of competitive play, and these cards are really good, actually. Bat Matter is add 2 Exosisters and then discard a card, which is great. The fact that it discards any card means that you can more aggressively play Mulch Armies in main, especially with how the format's looking. 6 Mulch Armies is looking at least very plausible for a lot of deck lists, especially if Vanquish Soul ends up being as good as I think it will with, the swap around they did on this most recent ban list. I do expect it to be, second, third best deck in the format. And then, again, bonus effect as well. You get to extra normal. It's a little bit awkward, and it's not the most impactful effect on the card. Obviously, that search is incredible, but the third effect, again, they just keep putting text on these cards. They could have stopped after the first effect, and this card would have already been great. But if a monster is sent to your opponent's graveyard, you can just make them banish one of them. This is very awkward. It's gonna let them choose. Like, for example, if you do this big Draco Tail chain, you send a bunch of guys, you can just basically pick the least important one. But there are situations where this does matter and will be really, really awkward. So it is again, it's a bonus effect. The main part of this card is already cracked as hell. So yeah, I mean, this card's incredible. Exosister, I don't think is going to get to that next level, but let's read the next card first. Last card Exosister's getting in this set is Carmail. Specifically, only takes Exosisters. I believe is the first of their Xyz monsters to have that requirement. But you can activate on summon. It'll set an Exosister spell trap during the end phase from essentially almost anywhere. When your opponent activates a normal spell or trap or a monster effect, you can essentially change that effect to they pick a card in your graveyard and it goes back to your hand, which triggers every Exosister monster. Generally, they'll be probably giving you an engine card just because they're not going to give you back a hand trap most of the time, but this card's obviously incredible. I don't think anyone needs to tell me it's incredible. Changing effects is one of the most powerful ways to stop something. It bypasses a lot of different kinds of protection. For example, I mean, just thinking back a couple of formats where we had Phantom of Yubel bypassing, Sengen Kaimen protection. There's just a lot of really neat interactions that you're able to get away with changing effects. And then obviously, again, it feeds into the Exo gimmick, where this is basically just a better negate that doesn't say the word negate on it. Like, strictly better. So, again, this card's incredible. It does essentially everything you want it to. It lets you extend a lot better, because it ends up being the third Xyz that is actually worth making turn 1. The issue that deck sort of had is you can make Caspatel, you can make Mikalis, those both are great. After that, you just kind of go, oh, I guess I'm going to make something else. Like, I have the bodies a lot of the time, but what am I going to do with it? This card solves that problem. Obviously gets you access to your spell traps, which are all generally pretty high quality. You generally right now are playing 1 Returnia, 1 Vadis in a lot of the lists I've been looking at. And then obviously this can still set Pax or Arment. Wouldn't recommend playing... Arment's a bit weird. But that's getting a little bit too deep into it. So this card is really, really strong. Do I think it's going to make Exosister, like, incredible? No. The one issue this card does have is it's dark, so you can't play Purge anymore. Again, not a massive deal, but it was a card that the deck had access to previously that you're basically not allowed to play anymore. You're more than willing to make that trade-off for this card, but it is just a small thing that is a little bit annoying. For the last of the really small support sets, there was a couple of archetypes that got these little 2-card injections where I'm gonna see Rescue Ace here. Full disclosure, I do not think these cards are particularly good, but I'm bringing them up anyways because I think I would get a lot of people telling me if I didn't. So, Quick Attacker, you can shuffle one of the Rescue Ace from your hand or face-up field into the deck, special it from your hand. You can tribute it, and you can't special from the extra deck for the rest of the turn except fire, and then you can add a Rescue Ace monster from your deck to your hand. Then, if only your opponent controls a monster, you can special the added monster. This card's kind of ass, I'm not going to lie. It's a probably one of max. It's very awkward. The fact that it has to shuffle from hand or face-up field means you essentially always -4 it. It's not even really guaranteed to plus that hard. It tributes itself for cost, so it's very vulnerable to things like Ash Blossom. It's not great. 0 to 1 of, in my opinion, but it's a bit awkward. Then we get to the new Link monster, the Link 4 Arbitrator. On Link Summon, you can add a Hydrant or the field spell from your deck or graveyard to your hand. And then if you activate a Quick Play or Normal Trap Rescue Ace card, you can target one card on your opponent's field, destroy it. This card is not bad, it's just exceedingly mid and not really what the archetype needed. You already had a pretty good Link 4 option, even when locked into fire with Pyro Phoenix. Like, that card is, or apologies, Raging Phoenix. That card is pretty good. I mean, this card is more interaction compared to that card in a lot of different situations, but it doesn't really fix the problems with Rescue Ace, where once you set 4, you do usually have a really good chance to win the game. It's just a matter of getting there, right? And this card doesn't help with that. It's a Link 4. You're not going to be, getting to it before you resolve your, your turbulence or your, a lot of your bomb cards, and that's kind of a problem, right? It's not like the card is terrible and not worth playing, but it's just not what the archetype needed. So I don't expect to see Rescue Ace popping off anytime soon, but if I am, I'm happy to be surprised. Alrighty, next up we're going to take a look at the Albaz adjacent stuff. There's a couple of different cards. They obviously don't all play in the same list, but it's just the best way I could find to organize them. The best of them is going to be Fallen of the White Dragon. This card is truly incredible. It is always treated as Fallen of Albaz. Please do note, this includes in deck building, so you cannot play 3 of this and 3 of the OG Albaz, which is very important. You're going to have to make some level of concession for a lot of the lists. So there are situations where you won't be able to play 3 of this card. I think it's a very interesting trade-off, and I think this card, I don't know if I want to call it well-designed, but it's an interesting card. So you can, for cost, send a Albaz Fusion from your, I guess technically any Albaz mention, but let's be honest, Albaz Fusion from your extra to the graveyard to special it. You can't special for the rest of the turn from your extra deck except for level 8 fusions and synchros. And then on normal or special, you can special a Ecclesia monster from your hand, deck, or graveyard. This card is broken. This card is one of the main reasons that Dracotel Branded is still as good as it is, even after the ban list. The ban list didn't exactly kill any aspect of the deck, it just made it less consistent. And that's what this this card doesn't exactly solve, but it gives you extra pieces that are very potent. I mean, this card essentially by itself makes a very strong Synchro, Ecclesia the Black Dragon, while also giving you Fallen in the Virtuous access that into your next turn will also be Branded Fusion access. This card's great. I mean, it's not surprising. It feeds extremely well into Dracotel specifically because, shocker, Altharion is an 8. Of note, though, I have seen a couple of people not realize this. Gulamel is a 7, so you won't be able to make that, but you can still make Secretarion, Mysterion. Like, there's a million things you can still make. You can even still make Chaos Starswords Dragon. So yeah, this card is just incredible. The only downside of it is, again, you do need to play a couple of quote-unquote bricks. You wouldn't be playing the Ecclesia or the vanilla Albaz. If you weren't playing this card, you'd just be playing, I guess, one of this card. If you want to, you can do that. It is still an option you can sort of have to make your Garnet less bad. It still gets you, for example, Fallen the Virtuous access. So you can even just do it in that way, where if you want to stay playing a little closer to pure Dracotail Branded, where it's just the 2 Branded Fusion, 1 Albaz, you can still do that with this card very well. But it doesn't obviously get its full value unless you're doing the extra little bit, and you do want to play that Ecclesia as well as the one OG Albaz, I guess I'll call it. But moving into the card the card enabled by it is Ecclesia the Black Dragon. During the main phase, you can banish this card until the end phase. Special and Fallen of Albaz from deck or grave. This includes the new one, obviously, but you're mainly going to be summoning OG Albaz for the Super Poly with this. Strong effect, but not incredible. It's basically doing what Cartesia did anyways, but on a more recursive body that also lets you just put your Cartesia in grave and add it back over and over again. So this card is good. The second effect, though, is where it gets a lot extra. If it's in grave, you can target a level 8 fusion in your graveyard banishment and one card on the field, shuffle them and this card into the deck. It recurs itself, it recurs your Altharions, it recurs your Albions, and it's also removal. This card is very strong, and I expect it to be on detail end boards for a lot of this format. A lot of the reasons you're making this card almost 100% of the time, unless you get Fuad, basically, where you would probably just want to stay on your Ecclesia to give less value. But again, game state dependent. So this card is incredible. No surprise, it's a very quickly becoming a mainstay in Draco Tail. So yeah, not really surprised at all. Then let's move on to the new Tri-Brigade card. If you control a Tri-Brigade or a Spriggan other than this card specifically, you can special this card from your hand. If the card is sent to the graveyard, you can special summon one of these from your graveyard. So you can either special a Tri-Brigade, a Spriggan, or Albaz, or a monster that mentions it. This is generally only really a Tri-Brigade card. I have seen some Spriggans lists that, want to play one or two copies of this, and it is good there, but Spriggan generally a little bit less competitive, even though I do think it has some potential, especially with Sargass, Regulus nonsense. But yeah, this card is generally going to be that Tri-Brigade piece of support. This isn't exactly what Tri-Brigade needed, especially because it only summons from grave and not banish pile. It makes a couple of the lines a little bit awkward, and managing your names can be a little bit awkward, but it does increase the ceiling of Tri-Brigade a decent amount. Is it going to be meta? Probably not, but again, it's a card that can make the deck quite a bit more potent. So definitely something to keep an eye out for. I don't know if I believe in this card enough for it to be an auto-include 3 of a lot of the time, but it definitely can fight for those spots with a lot of your non-engine that you currently would be playing. And then I sort of talked down on them, but this card is incredible. Gung-Ho Spriggans. Again, thank God they locked us to Spriggans, but if this card is Xyz summoned or sent to the graveyard, so triggers on Extraziel, technically, you can special Sargass from your deck or graveyard. Of note, this is the main deck Sargass, not the extra deck Sargass. This card is not as good. But you can detach 2 materials, add to your hand, or special summon one of these monsters from your deck, a Spriggan, a Therian, or an Albaz or monster that mentions it. This is the part that is really incredible. I do think there's a reality where, like, Spriggan Therion is a deck that can top a regional. I don't think it really goes that much farther than that, but there is so many incredible tools in Spriggan and in Therion, mainly Spriggan, honestly, that enable how bad most of the Therions are outside of Regulus and, Lilyboria, that, no, this card is very, very strong. So I don't expect it, again, to be a crazy meta option, but it's definitely something that does exist for people that like the Spriggan archetypes, or again, just the Albaz lore archetypes. I think it can have some success. I think it's something I'm pretty excited to see people toy around with. Up next, we're going to take a look at the new For Hire cards. For Hire is a deck that has seen a pretty okay amount of competitive success. There was For Hire Sprite Runic. There was a couple of other just random For Hire variants that have done well over time. A lot of them with Runic, and Runic is still, hasn't seen a ton of play recently, but I think it's just generally looking for a home. Outside of Radiant Typhoon, obviously, that does want to play those cards pretty significantly. This card is just Jokel. You can reveal it in your hand, special summon a monster For Hire from your hand, and this card. Of note, it isn't exactly Jokel. It summons one, then the other, which can make a difference, but generally isn't a huge deal. If a card is added from the deck to your opponent's hand by a non-For Hire card's effect, which I love the team fire there, but and you control a different monster For Hire as well as this card, you can draw a card. This is not bad. It's not, particularly incredible, but it does give access to what this deck sort of needed, which was hand extension. Traditionally, again, when we look back at like first wave, second wave of this archetype, its big problem was it normals a guy, that body gets removed, and then it just kind of goes whelp and then passes. That does still happen a lot, and this card will help you get past those situations, and it will, proc its secondary effect relatively often. So it's not a bad card by any means. This is not the single card that will fix the archetype, though. There's still a couple more to go, though. So let's keep things rolling. The new Link monster, 2 monsters with different types, so it is generic. If this card is Link summoned, you can set 1 spell trap for hire or 1 Fandora the Flying Fortress, the new field spell, from your deck. Also, you cannot special for the rest of this turn except for monsters for hire. So it does hard lock you to for hire, even though it can be made with non-for hires. I think this is a good compromise between, letting it sort of share conditions with Donner as far as summoning condition, while still obviously having a very strong effect that you can't afford to be giving away willy-nilly to. For example, things like Runic Spread for Hire would have loved this card if it didn't have a lock. But additionally, during your opponent's turn quick effect, you can banish this card from your graveyard, and if you do, special a monster for hire from your hand. Then, if your opponent controls a monster with the highest original attack on the field, you can special a second one as well. It's sort of like Nataria Mole Cricket in that way, but being tied to a graveyard effect is much stronger. It also doesn't really need you to have anything. This can be your only thing on the field. I can see, a couple of situations where this is what wins you the game. I mean, this effect is good. Again, it's not enough just yet, but we just still do have 3 more cards. Let's do the field spell first, just because it's, again, one of the specifically named targets. 300 attack for every fur hire you control with a different name for all your fur hires, which, again, it's a spam deck. You're going to get a pretty sizable amount of attack out of this, so it's not, a dead effect like on a lot of similar field spells. During your main phase, you can add a monster for hire from your deck to your hand, then discard a card. If a face-up monster for hire is destroyed by an opponent's card effect, you can special it for hire from your deck. This card is good, but it's probably only here to get set off the Link monster. I think it's a solid 1-of, but it is a bit too minus for being a 3-of. I think this deck has good enough consistency options. It doesn't really need to play 3 of this card, but it's a very solid option as a 1-of. Pseudo protection through, I call it dissuasion protection, where you essentially are protected by a lot of what your opponent wants to do, just because the threat of you going E-Telly from deck is quite an issue in this deck. You can summon a lot of really powerful things. My issue with this card is it says specifically deck, which means a lot of your 1-ofs that you want to pull in your initial combo, if they, for example, Regeki, and you want to start reestablishing your board with this card and maybe the Link Monster Graveyard effect, you can't pull 1-ofs out of your graveyard. It's a little awkward, but again, not a bad card. Solid 1-of. You can consider playing more of it if you do think you need the consistency. I just don't think that's personally going to be necessary. And then, apologies, it's not in the name, but it is always treated as a for hire card, so you can search it off of any of the spell trap searches. So again, solid 1-of option in my opinion, but we head over to what I would consider the best card of the new lot. The Link 2 is pretty good, but this card's also incredible. If you control no monsters, special a level 4 or lower monster for hire from your deck. Then if your opponent controls 2 or more monsters, you can special summon 1 from your deck. Again, I mean, this card's really great. I don't think it's a surprise that E-Telly is good. Double E-Telly is even better, but it does lock you to for hire. I mean, it kind of had to. If your for hire would discard to activate its effect, you can banish it from grave instead of discarding 1 of those cards. Important that they mention that it only replaces 1 of the discards, but that is still a great extra effect for an incredibly great primary effect. Again, this and the Exosister Carpendivum just have extra text that is incredible. It has, again, that Meow Moo sort of replacement that is very potent. I think it is an important aspect to have on a card like this that helps you not go minus. I think the issue that I have with this is it's specifically to activate its effect. So it only applies for cost, which is kind of the only way that makes sense for this card to work, but it is a slight downside for if they do print certain ways of designing cards for this archetype in the future. And then the last card is the new trap card. Target a face-up cards on the field with the... Apologies. Target face-up cards on the field up to the number of monsters for hire you control with different names. Destroy them. Or if you control a level 8 or higher and a Link 3 or higher monster for hire, you can banish them instead. If a level 8 or higher for hire and Link 3 for higher are on the field, you can special... Apologies. If a level 8 or higher or a Link 3 or higher is special summoned to your field while it's in your graveyard, you can add it to your hand. This infinitely recurs, which is incredible. Its effect is a tiny bit lackluster. I think obviously negation would have been stronger here, but being able to take control of the board is very impactful. I mean, you're going to run into a lot of situations where, for example, again, Detail just wants to set like 4 spell traps sometimes, and they are going to be able to do that because this card only works on face-ups. This card has issues. I think it probably still ends up being a one of, again, infinite recursion on cards like this is strong, but only if you're able to enable the grind games that it sort of plays into, which for hire is okay at, but this deck does sort of tend to get blown out a lot of the time, or it is just winning and doesn't need the recursion part of this card, or maybe this card at all. So I can see some lists shaving this, but I would accept, or I would assume, apologies, that this ends up being a pretty solid one of mainstay that, again, you can set directly off that new Link too. So good disruption piece that could have been a little bit better, I think, especially with how good some of the other traps in this set are. I think I'm a little too jaded as to how good specifically the Rokket counter trap is. But yeah, this card is good, just not incredible. Alrighty, up next we have the new Medius archetype, the new lore archetype. I'm going to also combine this with some of the sprinkled Medius support we've gotten for the other ones. Those will be at the end. So yeah, the new Power Patron, Elvennote Power Patron. You cannot special from the extra deck except Synchro Monsters. That's just while this is on the field. Once it leaves, you can do whatever you want. But during the main phase quick effect, you can target the monster in your center main monster zone, increases level by 3 until the end of the turn. Then immediately after this effect resolves, Synchro Summon an Elvennotes monster, or Janora the Power Patron of Tuning. Currently only 2 targets for this, so we will get to those in a moment. But if it's sent to graveyard as any synchro material, which it will be by its first effect, or you can hard synchro it if it does get negated, you can add any Elvennotes card from your deck to your hand. Obviously, all the Power Patrons, I think, are just very potently strong. This one especially so. It does feel like they keep getting better, and that trend continues into the next set as well. So it does feel like they're building a lot more specifically off of Medius in this lore than they were off of Albaz. Obviously, everything in Albaz mentions Albaz, but a lot of the Albaz archetypes don't really care about most of the Albaz cards. They're sort of tangentially related, but it looks like all of these are just directly, you're going to play Medius, you're going to like it, and you're going to go buy 3 of it. But this card is very, very strong. Gonna hop over to the synchros just because I think it's important to know the payoffs before we start talking about how it's enabled. So the level 10 Fire Fiend Synchro, 3100 attack. For this card Synchro Summon, you can treat a monster in your center main monster zone as a tuner. This is important, but not that important. Elvennotes is a tuner itself, and this needs 2 non-tuners, so this card is mainly just having that on it, so you can technically make 3 non-tuners into it, as long as one of them's in your main monster zone. Or apologies, center main monster zone. On Synchro Summon, you can negate the effects of all face-up cards your opponent currently controls, which is pretty good. Quick effect, you can make all opponent's monsters in the same column as your Elvennotes monsters unable to be used for extra deck summoning types, which is a little bit interesting. I mean, it's sort of Spellbound without the bad part of Spellbound, which is the fact that it's a bad card. But the main issue with this card is going to be, again, its summoning condition. The fact that it's generic is pretty cool, but I can't see this card being made generically that often. We do see a lot of the, Medius bosses be semi-generic, which is pretty cool, but I can't see this one seeing a ton of play outside of Archetype. Especially with it being a 10, it can also be a little bit awkward. Obviously, you don't have to level increase with the Power Patron, but it's generally something that you want to try to threaten. So this card can be a little bit awkward to make. It is not a terrible card, but it's not an incredible payoff for the archetype just yet, in my opinion at least. As we take a quick look, apologies, trying to find the other Synchro monster. I think I lost it here. There we go. Seraphim Slitzia, apologies. Original attack becomes 3,000 while in the center main monster zone, which is pretty cool, because otherwise I believe it's 0 attack, which is a little bit cringe, but During main phase, you can special summon one level 6 or lower Elvennotes monster from your hand or graveyard. Then you can decrease the levels of all level 4 or higher monsters currently on the field by level 3 until the end of this turn. Also, you can't special from the extra for the rest of the turn except for synchro monsters. This is a good effect. It does sort of help to enable the other power patron, but again, that other power patron, in my opinion at least, is not strong enough to sort of justify that level of, again, input into it. This card is just an enabler for a payoff that, in my opinion, just probably isn't good enough. So when we're looking at the rest of these cards, we got to think, okay, are they good regardless of their payoff? Because obviously, Elvennotes is still a great card, even if you're not making incredible things with it. Just syncing with it, even if you're not making power patrons, or apologies, even if you're not making Elvennotes, you can still search Elvennotes. So this can just be generic synchro fodder, but at least so far, the payoffs for this archetype, at least in the extra deck, are not as potent as some of the other Medius archetypes specifically. That does seem to be a little bit of a recurring theme, though, where the extra deck is not the main place where you're getting a ton of the power in these archetypes so far. Elvennotes Lucina, you can special from hand to the center main monster zone. You can only special summon it once per turn this way. During the main phase, you can add an Elvennotes monster from your deck to your hand, except itself. During your opponent's turn, quick effect, you can switch the locations of this card you control and the monster in your center main monster zone. Then you can return one level 6 or lower monster your opponent controls to the hand. If you haven't figured it out by now, there's a lot of center main monster zone gimmicking with this archetype, which is cool. I think it's nice to see them branch out in the design space, but this card does sort of remind me, or I should say this, maybe this entire archetype reminds me a lot of Archmage, where a lot of the power and a lot of what you want to be doing to interact with your opponent are on the main deck monsters, while they do also have some pretty good effects. Like, this is just kind of Jokel in a certain way, where it's, okay, it's going to summon itself out of hand, you're going to add a monster, and then it also gets a bonus interaction effect. The interaction effect is a little bit specific. Level 6 or lower monster your opponent controls to the hand is not, incredible, especially with Yummy leaving. I think that does get quite a bit weaker, but it's by no means a bad bonus effect to put on an already good enabler for your archetype. Then we go to Danaea, all of them special to the center main monster zone unless specified otherwise, but during the main phase, you can place a continuous spell from your deck onto your field face up. During your opponent's turn, quick effects, you can switch the locations and then banish one random card from your opponent's hand face up until the end phase. This is, again, good. I think it's, again, mainly here for the searching part. The rip is nice, and it does, it's a good amount of value, but it is generally a little bit weaker. It being random and you not getting to look is obviously two parts of it that are pretty bad, but it already is getting you advantage, and then it's also 1-for-1ing with a card in your opponent's hand. It's good. You can do this as well in draw phase before they get the chance to rip the Branded Fusion or the Ketsu or whatnot. So this card is very strong. Is it 3 of strong? Hard to say. I think it's depending, again, it depends on the rest of the archetype, but so we'll keep going. Fortuna, specials to center main monster zone. You can place one continuous trap from your hand or deck on your field face up. Again, the third of the, I guess they are just the Kashtira sisters at this point. During your opponent's turn, quick effects, you can switch the locations of this card you control and the monster in the center main monster zone. Return a face-up spell trap on the field to the hand. This is Kashtira Ogre. This is going to be the ugly duckling sister, maybe. Neither of these effects seem, ridiculously potent. Obviously, depends on the continuous traps. This card's probably not more than 1 of. I think, again, none of these are bad cards. They are doing multiple good things in one card and a body, and they're fodder, right? But you have to think about how much value your center main monster zone has. There are situations where that can get clogged up, where if you're not able to remove your or if you're not able to, for example, synchro it away or remove it from your field or move it somehow, you're going to be kind of stuck with it there. So you do have to be a little bit careful. So I do think this card probably ends up being a 1 of, but it's not a bad card by any means. Then we get into the spell traps. Again, remember, the continuous ones can be placed from the deck. You can send one monster from your hand, or apologies, a monster in your center main monster zone just can't be destroyed. Nice little bonus effect, again, plays into the gimmick. But you can send one monster from your hand or field to the graveyard for cost. Special an Elvennotes monster with a different original attribute from your deck in defense position. Also, you cannot special from the extra, except for synchros. This is essentially what makes the archetype tick a certain amount of the time. It clears your center main monster zone if you need it to. It cycles for more names without negating them. The synchro lock obviously shouldn't matter a ton if you're playing Elvennotes. Synchro is one of the better toolboxes, especially generically, where there's a lot of just random stuff you can make that people don't really think about. I'm still waiting for a deck where the the dark access code style level 10 is good. Uh, I don't think that's this archetype, full disclosure, but there's just a lot of random stuff in the synchro pool that can be very potent. So that being a synchro archetype is still great. Next one, can't target in the center. So if you do have both, you do get Dragoon protection, which is pretty nice. And then you get certain effects depending on what the attribute of the monster in your center main monster zone is. So you either get piercing, spell trap protection, or no battle damage. This card is the real ugly duckling. The targeting protection isn't generally okay. I mean, it stops you from getting hit by things like Veil or Imperm, which is nice. But generally, you'll be able to Veil or Imperm something else that is valuable throughout the course of the turn. You're not going to be able to stay there the whole turn, so the protection is important, but this card is a 1-0 of probably. I think this will especially be a card that gets shaved after another wave of support. So it's, again, not terrible, but not incredible. Moving into the traps, if your opponent's monster, or apologies, your opponent's monsters cannot attack while you have a monster in the center main monster zone, except attacking that monster, which is, again, not a great effect, but you can send one monster from your hand or field to the graveyard, then target an Elvennotes monster in your graveyard with a different original attribute, special it. Then, if you control a synchro monster, you can negate the effects of one face-up card your opponent controls until the end of this turn. That last part is the most important part. Swapping out is nice, especially because you can tag, obviously, for the Power Patron, which is great, which enables you to, again, do what you want to do with this archetype, which is synchro on your opponent's turn a lot of the time, especially because your big Power Patron only negates on summon the whole field, so you do have to be a little bit careful with timing. Again, solid one of. I think it's a pretty difficult time for a lot of these decks to have traps that are more than one ofs, but as far as it goes, this is a pretty solid one. And then we get to the last card, Oracle Aristia. You can target one face-up monster you control, move that monster you control to another of your main monster zones. When your opponent activates a spell trap card, if you control 3 or more, you can negate that effect, and if you control a synchro monster, you can destroy that card. This card's good. I think it's generally going to be the trap that people gravitate towards. Again, negation is powerful, especially spell trap negation is looking really good in the upcoming format with how strong most people are projecting Dracotail to be. Negating effect is especially relevant for things like Branded Fusion, and then there's also just plenty of other spell traps that you don't want to negate the activation of for fear of a second copy, things like pre-prep and then whatnot. So yeah, this card's really good. I think there's a reality where people do shave this card, especially if they don't need the consistency of being able to go trap monster, place this, move it, summon another guy. It seems a little bit less necessary, especially because, again, the trap one generally will probably be the weakest, and you don't generally want to play more than one of it. So it'll probably be this one that ends up as the one you want to play. I think there's a reality where you could go 1-1, but at least so far it doesn't seem like it has good enough access to multiple that I would want to do that. So yeah, I mean, again, I'll harken back to Kashtira because that is what this archetype reminds me of a good amount. You're not going to play Big Bang and Prep. You're going to play one or the other, and it's going to be for different reasons, but you're not going to play both of them, if any, right? I do think you are going to play this card. I don't think this is a cut by any means, but yeah, this card's good. I don't think it's that surprising that it's good, but it's good. Now that'll be the end of the Elvennotes cards, but now we get into the sort of Medius area where I didn't really know where else to put these cards, if I'm being honest. We go to Doomsday Changer. This is the, I believe, only Doomsday card in the set. Destroy a Doomsday in your hand, deck, or face-up field, except itself. That is already really good. That triggers every search in the archetype. And it enables just a ton. If it's destroyed by card effect, you can add a Doomsday card from your graveyard to your hand, except Changer. Then you can special summon a Doomsday from your hand. This part, I'd say, is probably worse than the first part, but again, multiple copies it's nice to have a bonus effect or just an alternate option. I think a lot of the time you're just going to be activating this. You're not going to really want to pop it a ton of the time, but hey, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. So, yeah, I mean, it's a good card for Doomsday. I don't think it's going to be that thing that brings Doomsday to the next level, but it's a just nice extra piece. Realize Liberation. If you control Medius the Pure, add to your hand or special summon one monster with 300 attack and 200 defense. So this obviously supposed to summon the power patrons. This has a couple of quote-unquote like unintended targets. It summons, funny enough, the entire Karibo archetype. So this is technically Karibo support if you're a Karibo enthusiast, but generally, this is going to be summoning power patrons, and then it can summon the Dinosaur Fur Hire. Rex, I believe, is the name. So that is actually a pretty interesting synergy. I don't think it's going to be a real deck, but it's just a funny little extra target you can try to mess around with. But during main phase, you can banish this card from your graveyard as well. Target one face-up monster you control, you can make it a tuner. I don't think this really sees play in any of the Medius archetypes, at least that I can think of. Obviously, getting access to power patrons is incredible. For example, if your Medius just doesn't resolve for one reason or another, you do generally, most of these archetypes still really need access to your power patrons. So this can be interesting, but I generally don't think it's an incredible option to have in a lot of these archetypes. And then rounding out our new lore section is Archmage Non Finito. Must be either fusioned or specialed from your extra by discarding a spell trap and tributing a level 7 or higher Archmage monster from your hand or field. So you can just insta no response, just put this on the field first action, which is great. It has a lot of flexibility in that way. You can, again, summon out the 7, get the value you're going to get off of a Fin Melt, and then just toss it away for this card if you believe that's what you need to do. Because on summon, you can just set an Archmage spell trap from your deck. That is obviously incredible. It turns any level 7 plus into a pseudo starter. It does a lot. And then once per opponent's turn quick effect, you can fusion summon, which is great. The only issue is this only uses monsters you control, which is not a massive deal. The big Nerva Power Patron is just a pretty good body. Again, I think this card is probably the card that might bring Archmage a little bit more into the meta. We have seen it get tops here and there. Archmage K9, I believe, was the main variant, so obviously K9 hits are going to make that a little bit weaker, but this card is a great extra power boost. You're going to be hard making it, you're going to be cheating it a lot of the time as well. It just sort of does what you want, and I don't believe this locks you anywhere if I am not missing something, so you can maybe try to mess around and find some ways to incorporate some XYZs as well. I mean, this being a level 7, Finmelt being a level 7, you can maybe try to get creative there as well. So I think this card is great, and I think it does affect how Archmage wants to play and makes it quite a bit stronger. So I think that'll be definitely a deck to look out for if you're heading to regionals anytime soon during Burst Protocol format. Alrighty, next up is some of the new Darklord stuff. 4 new Darklord cards, including one that is really, really interesting that we'll get to last. But these 2 new monsters do sort of form their own mini engine that you can play in pretty much anything. That if you're playing a deck that doesn't, really have a turn 1 play at all, for example, stuff like Eldritch, where you don't really have a ton to do, you can theoretically play an engine like this. Is it going to be incredible? Probably not, but we'll see. If it's normal or special, you can special any Darklord from your deck in defense position except itself. Also, you get locked into fairies for the rest of the turn. This has some great targets, but your main one is going to be the new guy, which we'll get to in a moment. If you control a Dark Fairy Fusion, you can banish this card from your graveyard, target a Darklord card or a Forbidden Quick Play in your graveyard, add it to your hand, which is obviously great, especially with Forbidden Crown, Forbidden Droplet, Forbidden Chalice. There's a ton of great Forbidden cards, and then obviously within Archetype, adding back Darklord Recursion is great. You have Ixchel, discard, add back the Ixchel for the next turn, use it again. You have a ton of different options with this card. This card's great. And then we get to the main thing that it'll be summoning, I think, most of the time. I believe most of the Dark Worlds can't be, or apologies, most of them can be tutored, but this card is just generally going to be better than most of them. You can only special it once per turn. On special, you can summon 2 tokens. They're level 6, but can't do a ton with that specifically. Obviously, you're locked into fairies, but you can maybe try to find a way to make some interesting fairy synchros with it. Also, you cannot special for the rest of the turn. It's got fairies. This one, again, just probably also has to lock just because it's giving you tokens and multiple of them at that. So If it's sent to the graveyard, though, this is the main part for this card, you can add one Darklord card or any forbidden quick play spell from your deck to your hand. So the engine that we do sort of see is these two cards synergizing just to search forbidden cards. Obviously, with Crown, that gets stronger than it was before, with something like even Condemned Witch. Apologies, the card name was eluding me there for a moment, but yeah, these two cards form a relatively interesting engine. There's quite a few interesting fairy link monsters that you can make. Theoretically, you can play this as a Melodious engine to make the Melodious Bloom. Apologies, don't remember the exact name, but that only needs two fairies. That gets you to your full Melodious combo while also giving you a quick play. That can get you, again, Crown, Droplet, Chalice are probably going to be the main three targets that you really care about. But just being able to do that for free, and, you know, you're obviously not going to get this part if you play it as an engine, but yeah, it definitely has options. So I think this is an interesting engine. Probably not going to see a ton of play, but there is a deck that I think could want to play these cards very easily. We get to, I think I'm going to go for the spell first, just because it is going to be most of the time how you're going to get into Darklord Evening Star, is Darklord Dance. Fusion summon a Dark Fairy fusion from your extra deck by banishing its materials from your hand, field, and or graveyard, and it gains 1,000 attack. If you're summoning a Darklord, you can also use Darklords on your opponent's field, which is, again, a small part. It's not a huge part of the Darklord game plan anymore, if I'm not mistaken. But again, just synergizing with your game plan is great, and technically in the mirror, this card is just Super Poly, which is very funny because it's sort of the Salamangreat of Fire effect, where this card sort of gatekeeps it from ever becoming too powerful because you just get to play Super Poly against it way easier with no cost. So that is kind of funny. But, I mean, this card is obviously great. It's generic. You can use it to summon a ton of different interesting fusions. Yeah, I don't know. This is obviously searchable by a lot of the Dark Lords, which is why it is important while also being a generic. So there's some definitely cool stuff you can do with this card. But its intended target, quote unquote, is going to be Darklord Evening Star. 2 level 6 or higher Dark Fairy monsters. Obviously, you can make it with the 2 tokens, even if I'm not mistaken. Can't be targeted while it's on the field. If this card is fusion summoned, you can set any Darklord spell and 1 Darklord trap from your deck. Quick effect, you can pay 1,000, target a Darklord spell in your graveyard, apply that effect when that card is activated. This card is crazy for the archetype. I don't think anyone needed me to tell them that, but I think it does sort of struggle to bring Darklord to the next level. I don't think I would really want to bring this to a regional. I don't know if it'll really be topping that many, if at all. So, again, I think it does give an extra little bit of oomph to an archetype that I know a lot of people really enjoy. So, yeah, I don't know. I think the other way you can summon this is with the Sanctuary in the Sky engine that they don't have in the OCG, as those are TCG exclusives. So, I don't know. You can maybe look to try to play around with that in a couple of other, non-Darklord decks where you can play some of the more broken spell trap targets, including Dance, and try to play it as a Dark Fairy fusion engine pile. I think that is an option that could be pretty interesting. Then, I believe the last of it is the big one. It's the Rokket cards. These cards are something, that's for sure. There's a lot of them, so I'm going to try to go through these a little bit faster, but Rokket Loader. On normal or special, you can add a level 7 Dark Dragon from your deck to your hand. You can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one face-up monster on the field. Its attribute becomes dark until the end of this turn. This card was a lot better until they revealed the Rokket Circular that dumps Abzerrouter for cost, but even though you probably don't want to be searching Abzerrouter with this because you can dump it directly off of that when those overframes do release, this has still some other really great targets. Destrudo, Phantasme, and the biggest one in my opinion is Noctivision Dragon. Noctivision Dragon is a crazy card that is sort of gated by not being searchable until now. I think it's a card that a lot of people really have always wanted to play in Dragon Link. It goes extremely plus. It does a lot of great things, even in Grave, but it sort of struggles to justify its place in the deck list over something like combo starters or hand traps, right? I think cards like Noctivision have gotten left behind a little bit, where they're these good extenders that aren't necessarily, starters. They don't do anything by themselves. But this card Obviously doesn't solve that problem with Noctivision, but it allows you to just say, hey, I'm just going to play one Noctivision, and this card is going to full combo me because it's good. So that's definitely a really strong option that I think will see play in the deck. I think Noctivision is going to be a standard as a one of if you're playing a lot of copies of this. Again, I don't know how much this card survives in the list once the Overframe comes out, but I think you could still definitely justify at least one of it. Moving on to Hollow Rocket Dragon. When a Link Monster's effect is activated that targets this card on the field, quick effect, you can destroy this card, excavate 6, banish 1, put the rest on the top of the deck in the same order. This card is going to suck to resolve, by the way. But, I mean, being able to essentially Kashtira Ogre is cool. It's kind of awkward, though, tied to a level 6 body that doesn't have a way to put itself on the field. Other effect, though, is during the end phase. If it's destroyed by a card effect that turn, you can summon a Rokket from deck. Most of them have this stipulation to synergize with Tracer and a couple of the other Rokket adjacent Link monsters that want to pop your own guys. I think this card is, again, generally designed to be summoned off of those effects in the end phase. Then you can target them with your Borals and then immediately rip their deck. I think it's an interesting card, probably to win more to see consistent play, but looking at top deck is like very good. Especially being able to target down one-ofs in certain situations is powerful, but I don't think this card likely justifies its place in the deck list. Moving on to Rokket Detonator. If you control a Dark Dragon Link, you can special it from your hand. You can only special summon it once per turn this way. You can target a Dark Dragon monster card in your spell and trap zone, special summon it, but it cannot attack this turn, and its effects are negated. Also, you cannot special summon from the extra deck for the rest of this turn, except for dark monsters. This one's really weird because we didn't get Savage back like we thought we might have to enable this card. So this card kind of doesn't really do as much as it was intended to. I don't think it's going to see a ton of play, mainly because, again, its niche is just not really there anymore. This feels like it was very much designed by the OCG team. So we're going to head into Borreload Fatal Flare Dragon. If this card is fusion, you can add a Rokket monster from your deck to your hand, which is already great, considering its materials are a Dark Link and a Dark Monster, which is not, extremely easy, but it's pretty easy, let's be honest. There's a ton of Link ones that this deck can play, including Pisty and Tracer and all kinds of stuff that make this just really easy to summon. You can target a dark monster you control, equip a dark link monster from your graveyard or banishment to it as an equip spell that gives it 500 attack. If it's sent to the graveyard as link material, you can target a card on the field and destroy it. This card is good, but probably isn't worth the bodies that would be needed to make it. Obviously, that does sort of get fixed by this card, which we'll go over right now. Double Trigger. Fusion summon by banishing materials from graveyard, including a Rokket, or ritual summon by banishing materials from graveyard that equal or exceed the monster's level, including a Rokket. Letting you cheat this guy out is nice. It's not like truly incredible. I think it's a good monster, not a great monster. Obviously, again, it enables the other Rokket that we just went over, but I still don't think you're going to play that card much anyways. This card is not Savage. It wants to be Savage so bad. But obviously it gets more value when we get the circular, right? The overframe. So that'll be something to keep an eye out for. I think this card's value is still good for now, but it definitely just gets way higher when a card of that high quality comes out down the road. So it's hard to say if this will justify its place in lists. I think obviously Double Trigger is the great card here. I think Borreload Fatal Flare Dragon does sort of struggle to justify its spot in the extra compared to some of the other options. But it is definitely still a strong option, again, especially after that overframe comes out. Boral Shroud Dragon, 3+ effect monsters, Link 5. Your opponent cannot tribute this card on the field, so you can't Kaiju, Lava Golem, Sphere Mode it. Once per turn, during the main phase quick effect, you can target a Rokket you control, negate the effects of one face-up card your opponent controls, then destroy the Rokket. Your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response to this card's activation, which is incredible. Non-responding negation is great. There's a reason Judgment's banned, but this is obviously tied to a Link 5, so it's plenty more balanced. But once, while face up on the field at the start of the battle phase, you can also just summon a Link 4 or lower Boral Link from your extra deck. I think he is going to go for the Borosword. Yeah, no, this card's great. I mean, that's not a surprise. Non-responding negation while also being a card that just cheats out 4 link value that are all like really great cards. There's a ton of options for this. Obviously, going into the battle phase, Boral Sword's going to be the one that kills the most efficiently, but Boral Load is an option, even though I don't know if it can fit into this extra deck. Um, you just have so many good options. Next up, technically not or apologies, no, this one is still the Boral. Trisboral Dragon, 2 dark dragons, including a Rokket. If this is linked, you add a rapid trigger, heavy interlock, or double trigger from your deck to your hand. You can target 1 face-up card you control and 1 dark dragon in your graveyard, destroy that card on the field, and if you do, add the other monster to your hand. This card is crazy. Obviously, these targets are specifically set. It doesn't search Rokket spell traps, for example. Obviously, those don't exist, but you get my point. Um, Double trigger is, again, obviously the best of them. Heavy interlock is pretty bad, all things considered. You can tell because it's a card that's way older. I by that I mean like I think only 2-3 years old. It's from Burst of Destiny, but even still, I mean double trigger is what you're searching off of this like 99% of the time, and then you're gonna also search Boral Reboot when you either don't play double trigger. Apologies, this doesn't search the counter trap. I clicked on the wrong card, but yeah, you're mainly gonna be searching the new spell off of this. Double trigger is just the best search target generally. Um, that's why I sort of say that Fatal Flare gets carried by how good its enablers are. And again, sometimes a card can afford to be less good if its enablers are just this strong. So, yeah, very, very strong cards. Alrighty, it's a different day. I'll be fully honest, I made a couple of mistakes while evaluating these last couple of Boral and Rokket cards. So I wanted to go back over these and sort of highlight a couple of things that I either skipped over or didn't realize in the case of the Topologic Blaster Dragon the first time around. So, the counter trap Boral Reboot when your opponent activates a spell or trap card, and if you control any Rokket or Boral, negate the activation, and if you do, set that card. You can activate from hand by paying half life. This card's obviously incredible. I think the issue it has, at least immediately in Burst Protocol format, is you can't search it yet. The card that does search it doesn't come out until the next set. Actually, it's this card here. So, yeah, the Breach Boral Dragon doesn't come out until Blazing Dominion, so that'll be something to keep in mind. This card's quality goes up pretty significantly when it is searchable. I think there's a reality you can still try to weave copies of this into your list because of how good it is. And one of the main reasons it is so good is because it is an like Imperm Impulse Songs Purge card. Like that is a very valuable asset to have. Obviously, more so when it's searchable, but when you hard open this card, like there's a reality with it. I can see people side 3 of this. It's not once, and it does stop again some of those blowout hand traps. Mainly Impulse is the one I'm thinking of off the top of my head, but Imperm in some places in this deck can be really annoying. So really interested to see if this does see play before it's searchable. I think that's going to be the big thing with this card is once it is searchable, I mean, it is just kind of half of Toad, which is obviously great. I don't think that's a huge surprise, but this card does get quite a bit better after the next wave of Rokket support that we are again getting in the next set. So we're not getting many cards, but it does make this card significantly better. This card has a ton of upsides though. Again, even before like it's searchable, the fact that you're able to hold it in hand both synergizes with the next card we're going to talk about, the Topologic Blaster Dragon, as well as just again, it's just a nice extra part. I think you're almost always going to hold this card in hand. It gives you the flexibility to not have to negate stuff like LS Duster or even just like random Draco Tail threatening, like Urgula stuff. You can be a little bit more, pick and choose with it, which is fantastic. Again, the fact that this isn't once is one of the big things that's making me at least consider it before it's searchable. But obviously, once it is searchable, you're probably just going to play one of this. There's a reality where you can play 1 in main, 2 inside even maybe, and side these in as pseudo cross-out called by type cards. Is that going to happen? Probably not, but the fact that it's even possible just means, I mean, it's so obvious that this card is just extremely high quality. And then onto the last Rokket card in the new set, Topologic Blaster Dragon, 2+ effects. And you cannot summon 2 extra monster zones this card points to. That only applies to yourself, obviously, just so you can't V-Link with it. Konami's pretty insistent on not wanting us to V-Link people, which is valid, I guess. But when a monster is special summoned to a Link zone, any Link monster points to, apply one of these effects. Keep note, this is mandatory. You do get to pick the effect, but you can only use each of the effects once per turn. So you can either shuffle all monsters on the field except for this card into the deck, shuffle all spell traps into the deck, or look at your opponent's extra deck and banish a card from it. This card is very strong, especially the unicorn style effect is, a card effect that has been really both annoying and powerful. I think when you're both, you get to have a lot of flexibility as a card, and that generally means you're just a good card. The issue with this card, though, is the same issue that basically all the Topologics have, where your opponent sort of gets to dictate the pace at which this card basically works. Your opponent essentially only needs to summon to a zone 3 times for you to out your own entire field. Because you obviously, first time, you can either pick to look again, or you can shuffle all the spell traps, just so you don't shuffle all your own monsters. But the third time it drops, this is mandatory, and it will be immediately Chainlink 1. So they can even chain block you from negating your own Topologic Blaster Dragon in a lot of situations, and this can just completely screw your board. So I do think this card's very cool and interesting. Will it see a ton of play? I'm going to say probably not, especially with just how many other good Link 5s this deck has access to after this set. I think you're going to always just be making the Negation Link 5. It's obviously seems to be the best of them. I mean, it's going to be one of your best options in a lot of different situations. And to round us out, we're going to take a look at the new TCG exclusive archetype, GMX. Had to wait a little bit on this one. This card, funny enough, was revealed 5 hours ago, quite a bit a ways from when the rest of the cards were revealed, but this is one of the most important cards in the archetype, so I'm going to show this one off first. GMX Applied Experiment number 55. Excavate the top cards of your deck until you've excavated both a GMX monster and a dinosaur monster. Lose 400 life points for each excavated card, then you can fusion summon one GMX fusion from your extra deck using excavated monsters as the material. And then you shuffle the rest of the cards back into your deck. This is just incredible. I mean, the life point loss, you can dig 20 cards. You're not going to really realistically have issues with burning yourself too much. You should realistically be able to resolve 2 to 3 of this per game without really worrying about it. Even if you really low roll, you're not going to just straight up die like 99.9% of the time. So it's not a real cost. I do like them incorporating life point into costs a lot more like this in a way that actually can matter in a deck building sense. So I think that's really interesting. But yeah, I mean, I think this is the card that obviously is just an incredible enabler. I went and read over all the, GMX stuff yesterday until I realized, oh wait, we just don't know what this card does specifically. The thing to keep in mind when it comes to reading TCG exclusives or just new archetypes in general, this goes for Elvennotes as well as GMX, you're not necessarily looking for the whole package in the first wave. I think there's very few instances historically even where, an archetype has been incredible right out of the gate. Even when you look at like Mitsurugi, which was like pretty okay right away, it really didn't start popping off until we got Habakiri and Wosu and Magatama and Aramasa, right? So definitely something to keep in mind while evaluating a lot of these cards. I'm going to be a little bit more, again, forgiving, but this is just an incredible enabler for an archetype. Like this is, I mean, obviously great. It is kind of awkward. Obviously, it's RNG based branded fusion, but it's branded fusion and it doesn't lock you. So you can get pretty adventurous with this card. I mean, obviously, there's tons of dino support in the game, like tons and tons. So hopping into the rest of the archetype, GMX Researcher Celand. This is going to be your main sort of, I mean, it's a Stratos. It does quite a few things for the archetype. On normal summon specifically, you can search one non-warrior GMX. So this will be the dinosaurs, or one level 3 or lower dinosaur from your deck. So this one is a warrior. The rest are, I believe, a lot of the others are dinosaurs. Um, Funny enough, this does also summon the For Hire starter, so you can really consider playing this in For Hire, because Rex is just that important. Whether or not it actually makes the cut is to be determined. I'm not as on the pulse with For Hire, but it's just a funny little extra synergy. There's a lot of stuff this can summon. I mean, this can summon, Baby Sarah. Obviously, it doesn't enable those cards in a fantastic way, but just the fact that it can do that as a potential way into Dino eventually getting a 1-card combo is great. On special, it'll add a spell trap. So it sort of is similar to Ninja Hanzo, where it does different things on normal and special. You can use each effect of it once per turn, so you're ideally going to want to try to do both. Um, but again, we're looking for enablers, and this is a really strong enabler. I think this archetype so far does lack payoffs, so I'll say that before anything. None of them are like truly incredible, but again, that can be fixed with another wave of support. If you have incredible enablers, that is half the battle. I think there is archetypes that, I mean, even for example, like RB, which is a pretty agreed upon bad archetype, has just incredible enablers. Like some of the best enablers you can read, but it just doesn't have the payoffs. So I think if this archetype does get more payoffs, I think it definitely could make a splash. Bonus effect, if a Dino Fusion is on the field, you can shuffle it from the field into the deck, and if you do, negate the effects of one face-up card on the field until the end of this turn. Nice little bonus effect, but generally not ultra impactful. Moving on to Chairman Kimridge. This is the other non-dinosaur. You can reveal this card in your hand, add 1 applied experiment 55 from your deck or graveyard to your hand, and if you do, shuffle this card into the deck. So it's sort of 1-for-1s for your most important card. So just more access to what is essentially, again, a little bit more awkward, but it is just Branded Fusion still, so great to see. If this card is special summoned by a monster effect specifically, you can target 2 cards in your graveyard that are GMX cards and or dinosaur monsters, place them on the top of your deck in any order, then you can destroy 1 attack position monster your opponent controls. This effect is a little awkward. It sort of has the horn problem where specifically attack position monsters is a little bit awkward to try to work around sometimes, especially when your opponent knows it's coming. Obviously, it being on summon and this being a new archetype does sort of give it a little bit more of that surprise factor, but when everyone's playing around Horn already to a certain extent, just mentally, this card's going to be a little bit more awkward, but obviously the main part of it is just to search your Branded Fusion, which is great. Apologies, that's just all of the cards. Associate Noma, this is the reptile. If this card is special summoned by a monster effect, you can target 1 card each from your graveyard and your opponent's graveyard, put them on the top or bottom of the decks. If a monster is normal or special to your opponent's field while it's in your monster zone, you can fusion a GMX by shuffling from field grave banishment, which is pretty good. Again, this card is awkward. Obviously, the amount it does is kind of tied to how much the fusions do, so let's wrap back to this one at the end after we finish reading these 2 fusions. First of them is going to be GMX Allos, Light Dinosaur, GMX Monster plus a Dinosaur, which again, Branded Fusion. So that's not the most difficult requirement. Each time your opponent normals or specials, you gain 200 life. Kind of a fake effect, but let's keep going. This does sort of recoup the life point cost on the Branded Fusion, but again, life points are kind of fake. You can target 1 GMX monster or 1 dinosaur monster in your graveyard or banishment, special summon it. This card cannot attack the turn and this effect is activated. At the start of the damage step, if this card battles, you can destroy the opponent's monster. This is a pretty okay enabler. I mean, you can Branded Fusion one of your starters / extenders into the graveyard. Again, the issue is that it's randomly, which means none of the great consistency pieces are going to be incredible. Obviously, there are ways for, again, for example, Chairman can put itself on the top specifically, or can put, cards, I should say, on the top. But it is going to be at a certain level inconsistent. So something to keep in mind, but not a terrible card. I mean, again, not incredible. There's just no payoff yet, I think, is the big issue for this archetype. So we go to Velox, which again is supposed to be somewhat a payoff. Sort of has that same part where you can recoup the life point cost. During your opponent's turn, quick effect, you can target 1 card your opponent controls, excavate the top card of your deck until you execute a GMX, lose 400 for each excavated card, add that GMX monster or dinosaur, special summon it, and then shuffle the rest into the deck. Also, after that, destroy the targeted card. This is a great effect, but again, this is kind of all you have so far. Apologies, unless there is more cards that somehow we just didn't get in the pre-releases and the sneak peeks. Um, at least so far, this archetype has some pretty solid enablers. Again, like Branded Fusion with no lock is strong. Generally, Dinosaur is like a extremely well-supported archetype, or apologies, type in general. Fossil Dig is just the best Rhoda in the entire game, bar none. I think I'm pretty confident in saying that. I don't think purely from a card qualities perspective that any card that searches is better than Fossil Dig. Like it's level 6 or lower, non-once. What more can you ask for as a Rhoda? And it's still at 3, which is incredible. But again, this archetype probably won't make a huge splash out the gate. But interested to see again what it can do when we get to one or two more waves of support. I think this could definitely be an option that can springboard into the future. With that being said, though, that will do it for the first, hopefully, of many episodes of reading whole sets so you don't have to. Let me know if there's anything that you would have added in here that I missed. I know I skipped a lot of the Archfiend cards specifically. I don't think they're going to be particularly competitive, and the issue with trying to evaluate Archfiend cards is there's a million of them, and they all can kind of weirdly interact with each other. But I don't think it's going to do anything even really at the regional level too strongly. I guess you could say that about some of the other stuff I reviewed here, but if you do want me to go over those or any other sets, maybe even all the overframes or something like that, be sure to let me know, leave a comment below, drop a subscribe, and thank you all so much for watching.